items specifically, you mentioned right at the top are these kind of smaller groups. So I would love to just for our audience, or maybe to put it two and two together as to why that makes more sense from a sustainability angle to be those smaller groups. Can you help elaborate a little bit further?
Someone said once, a city can have tourists, but the tourists cannot have a city. And I think there's a lot about that. You cannot just bombard cities or sites. But if you do it in smaller groups, basically like a family, it's you can respect the places you visit way more, and the city can still be sustainable for locals as well, and not just tourists. It's the type of products you're using as well, and you know, offering a lot of different products. So not just a highlight, which kind of encourage people to just come to a city and go to, for example, if you come to Rome and you just do Vatican Colosseum, but to actually have a wide spectrum of different products so that you want to stay for longer, which promotes slow tourism, and also how you travel when you're in the destination.
You're expanding around Europe right now, which is really exciting and beyond. How do you navigate that growth? Maybe even just locally as you're adding more and more to kind of keep that small, intimate experience. And then how do you manage to replicate that and still feel authentic as you're expanding?
It involves a lot of time of research. We are based in Rome, and this is our kind of home market. And this is where we personally, so me and my husband, because this is a family business, this is where we really know the grounds. And when we expand, it takes a long time because we have to do a lot of research. We have to connect with those local experts. So we don't just go to, Salzburg or Berlin and say, hey, now we want to do this and this tour. We actually consult and we find someone on the ground there that, understand what kind of product, the quality we want to offer the travelers. And then we work with those locals in that destination.
I think it's so important having that local connection and to be able to understand not just those top destinations, but really what's important at the grassroots. The same can definitely be applied when it comes to sustainability. I know a lot of times for companies where we see the greatest impact are from those grassroots initiatives from our employees, where there is a desire to create kind of a sustainability committee. And you mentioned that this is part of the work that you're doing. Can you share about how that started and where that group is going?
Sustainability has always been a big part of LivTours, but working in tourism, and I'm sure there's the same thing with many other industries as well, you kind of get into your work and it's hard to work on side projects, even though you're very passionate about them. So it was very nice to see that we had so many very passionate people in the different departments that kind of started this committee and like, no, we want to do more. We can do so much more. Let's get going, put our heads together and actually start working and finding all these different actions that we can implement. So, and they came up, they were the ones who came up to me and said, this is something we want to work with. Do we have the okay from you? And I was like, yes, I love this. Let's get started. And now we are 10 people actually in the committee working hard. We meet almost once a week to talk about the different actions we can take and how to implement them. We have IT, we have customer service, operations, and the ones that work with suppliers. So yeah, quality, everything, which is really, really nice. We have a great spread. And that's, I think, one of the most important things as well when you work with sustainability. You cannot just look at one little part of your company and be like, okay, this is where we're going to work on. It has to be follows through the whole company. Otherwise, you lose too many aspects.
Which I'm sure many of our listeners are trying to keep in mind when we are booking our own trips. So I'd love to ask you a couple of questions. Maybe one, you touched on the topic of greenwashing. I know for myself, I know my industry very well, and so I can see where there's greenwashing there. Are there any tips maybe for our listeners who are trying to book their travel for them to make sure that they are truly pursuing more sustainable tourism options? Is there anything that they can keep an eye out for, maybe that makes them feel more comfortable that it is truly sustainable, or maybe something to watch out for?
Well, there's a lot of companies, third-party companies that gives out these certificates. And it's also important to know what kind of company it is, because again, here there's greenwashing. There's companies that say, okay, pay me this, and I give you a certificate. So I think it's one of the most important things to look for is if the company has our certificates and have been approved to be working on sustainable actions. So there's different ratings. For example, we worked with a company in Canada called Green Steps, and they went through all our products. They went through how we work internally, really anything from, what type of electricity provider we have to how we get to work. And they rated us with a silver. So it was not gold. And this is what we are aspiring to get in the future. But that's something that, travelers can look up and see what kind of rating the different companies have, and if they have actually reached out to someone to get a rating. Otherwise, what kind of marketing do they do? Is it something, they just put a social post on Earth Day? Maybe they're not that green. But is it something that is, constantly in the marketing and in social media to inspire people to travel more sustainable? Then I would say it's probably a better company. And if not, just ask them, when you email them and say, hey, I want to book this and that, add a question and say, how do you work with sustainability? Because I think that's, then you open up for the dialogue and you actually get to know more in detail what they do.